Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, in our ongoing study in the Gospel of Mark. We're going to look at chapter 7, verses 24 through 30. And let's look at the text first in block 1. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it. Yet he could not keep his presence a secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syria. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. First, let the children eat all they want, he told her, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Lord, she replied, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Then he told her, for such a reply, you may go, the demon has left your daughter. She went home and found her child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Very fantastic story. Okay. Let's see what the commentaries have to say about this. Let's go to block 2 and take a look at Ruckman. The woman was from the Phoenician province of Syria, a Canaanite, and she was in this act of humility. She was converting from idol worship by falling in humility to Christ's feet. This narrative also appears in Matthew 15. The dogs referred to here refers to lost Gentiles. See Psalm 22, Philippians 3, or Revelation 22. So, according to Ruckman, this is an example of a pagan idol worshiper who is so desperate with a child in desperate psychological and spiritual need that she is repenting. She's turning away from idolatry and turning toward Christ in faith. And this is an act of contrition and humility. And it's an act of repentance because she's turning from Canaanite idolatry. Let's take a look at Edwards in note 2. Jesus embarks upon a ministry to the Gentiles within Syria, partly in response to escape ongoing harassment by the Pharisees. Here Christ does mighty works, and there is no emphasis on teaching here. Salvation history begins with Israel and then proceeds to the Gentiles. But salvation history begins with Israel. This example of Gentile openness anticipates the later Gentile confession at the cross in Mark's Gospel. I love that statement. Very, very good statement. The Gentile openness in this narrative anticipates the Gentile confession later at the cross in the Gospel of Mark. That's very true. It's very, very true. We have that unveiling of Messianic identity at the end of the Gospel. And at that unveiling, we have the centurion announce, surely this is the Son of God. So I love this statement by Edwards, but primarily what both commentators are saying is that this is Gentile contrition, Gentile humility, Gentile repentance from idolatry, and in spiritual desperation, in psychological desperation, a mother turns toward Christ. she is desperate. The daughter she loves needs psychological and spiritual deliverance. And because of her faith, or as we have in verse 29, for such a reply, you may go, the demon has left your daughter. For such a what? Reply of faith. She falls in contrition to the feet of Christ. She falls at his feet. So it's a great example of a woman in the Gentile region, the region of Syria, a woman that in the environment of pagan idolatry, a Canaanite who converts from idolatry by falling in humility to the very feet of Christ in contrition, in humility, and in faith. It's an example, as Edward says, it's an example of Gentile openness, and it anticipates the later to come through Paul, the Gentile ministry of the faith, which will find its ongoing fruition in the Apostle Paul. But Christ initiates Gentile ministry in this narrative. Now we know Paul is going to augment this. He's going to really bring this initial ministry to Gentiles to a further depth and a greater fruition in his own ministry, which is a miracle in itself with his Damascus conversion. And then the other miracle of the Jerusalem Council, where he actually had to win over the leaders in Jerusalem. But all of this was in the sovereign hands of the Lord. This Gentile ministry would be initiated, this Gentile ministry would be sustained, and this Gentile ministry would come to mature fruition in the Apostle Paul, beginning with his Damascus and Arabia conversion. Remember, it was over a period of years, not just an instance on Damascus Road, but it was the Damascus conversion coupled with the retreat into Arabia and private meditative and prayerful time in Arabia before he ever went to Jerusalem and interviewed Simon Peter and James the Just, and later had to go through the Jerusalem Council and persuade the leadership in Jerusalem, especially James the Just, that the Gentile ministry was intended by the truth of the gospel. It was a universal truth, and it needed to be universally proclaimed as a light to the Gentiles. But it begins with Christ's own ministry. He opened up the ministry to the Gentiles here. Let's go on and take a look at block 3 in the Greek. And I just went to verse 24. Having entered into a house, Eiselphon eis oikion, he desired that no one know it, but he was not able to be hidden. He wasn't able to conceal himself. Again, we have the theme of the Messianic secret surfacing in this Gospel of Mark. Throughout the entire Gospel, we have these instances of Christ keeping his Messianic identity secret, keeping his Messianic identity concealed. Why? Because his kairos, appointed time of unveiling, will come later and it'll be on the cross when he cries out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" That horrifying moment of abandonment on the cross is the Kairos appointed time. Remember, Kairos time is appointed divine time. Chronos is chronological time. But that will be the Kairos appointed time of the unveiling of the messianic identity of Christ as suffering servant, as prophesied in Isaiah. But that is an event moment that will occur when the veil is torn from top to bottom in the temple, when the sky darkens from 12 to 3 p.m., when the earth quakes, when Christ cries out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" And in that declaration of abandonment, Christ gives up his spirit, and the temple veil is torn, and the messianic identity of Christ as suffering servant is unveiled for all of eternity in that triune revelatory event. And it is a triune, the cross is a triune revelatory event. Father, Son, and Spirit are all actively participants in the passion of Christ in that revelatory event. And that's why we have in block 3 here that verse 24, Christ wants to maintain the messianic secret of his true messianic identity because he's confronted by false perception by the Jewish religious leaders, by the false expectations of a militant Messiah that would overthrow Roman occupation, which he wants to do away with and negate. Therefore, he wants to conceal his own true messianic identity until the Kairos appointed time, which will be the Kairos appointed time of the messianic unveiling of the messianic identity on the cross in spiritual abandonment. So it's a very, very powerful narrative of Christ initiating ministry to the Gentiles. We always think of Paul as the one who initiated ministry to the Gentiles, but that was the intention of the Father all along. That was the sovereign plan from the very beginning. Salvation is offered to all humanity. And the Jews were to be a light to the Gentiles. They were not to turn inwardly, they were to turn outwardly and become a light to the nations. They failed in that task. Christ came to inaugurate Gentile ministry in this narrative. And he does inaugurate Gentile ministry here. And the greatest statement, I think, is in Block 2, Note 2F. This Gentile openness anticipates the Gentile confession of the centurion at the cross. At the cross. I believe that. I truly do believe that. We close out this gospel with a Gentile confession of Jesus as the Christ. That's going to wrap up 7:24 through 30. And next time it's 7:31 to 37, 31 to 37, next lesson.